Hello, well, it's the 7th of December and we are a week in to our Advent calendar. Hopefully you're starting to feel the festive spirit and your thoughts are turning to the holiday period. In front of me I have the Lard Island Advent calendar and I'm just opening the window. Let's see what it says. What has been the most interesting build or painting project you've worked on in 2023? What inspired it? How did you achieve it? What do you intend to do with it? Well, for me, 2023 has been a period of some pretty intense playtesting with the Burma project doing the rounds of the shows. But many of you will recall that the big Burma build happened in 2022. It was actually featured on Lard TV last Christmas. So that doesn't count for this year. My biggest build project in 2023 in terms of terrain was building some landmark structures for our Arnhem visit in October. But that was pure hard labour, and the words interesting and inspiration had nothing to do with it, so let's gloss over that. The most interesting build project of the year was the one that I did, I did it for fun, which is the best type of project, was actually creating a ghost town for What a Cowboy. That was predominantly done using MDF models from a variety of companies, but taking the basic kit and adding to it, as I did with the Sarissa Japanese rural buildings for the Burma project. It was great fun to do and actually very easy, but it allowed me to create a unique setup, including a herd of aggressive beavers who'd moved to the town from Las Vegas, all part of the fun. On top of that, despite having dozens and dozens of Foundry cowboys, it also allowed me to have some fun with the Great Escape Games plastic cowboy set and create some characters like Little Jim for my games, for those of you who've seen his exploits on Lard TV. I've mentioned before how I like to create terrain and armies that are unique to me, and this project again ticked those boxes. The opportunity to convert with plastic figures is a huge plus for those, slightly outweighed by the fact that I prefer metal kits, but there we go, you can't have everything. However, for a combination of interesting and inspiration, there can only be one project, and I'm actually still working on it. It's going to be my big Christmas holiday project, getting it finished, and that's a project called Swordlands. Now, I've mentioned before how I worked with Mike Hobbs and some other friends on the start of a rule set called The Sword of the King that never was actually completed due to Mike's very sad demise. However, one part that was well underway was the creation of the world in which the rules were to be set. I know many people were quite surprised to hear that I was the architect behind that world, chiefly. I'm obviously known as a pretty dyed-in-the-wool historical gamer, and I think a lot of people assume that fantasy isn't my bag. And to a degree it isn't. I guess I describe myself as a Tolkienist rather than a fantasy gamer. I tend to annoy hardline historical gamers by insisting that Tolkien is historical. Anyway, the world that I developed was very much along the lines of Tolkien, but it had lain dormant for some years, until about a year ago when I got together with James Morris to play Midgard. In truth, Midgard transcends historical and fantasy, but it extends into the legendary as well, with Homeric warfare, the wars of the Norse, Celtic and Irish legends. And you can see history and legend intertwine in some of the armies that are going to be in the rules. And this combination really got me thinking. As we progressed through the editing process of Midgard, I realised that the rules would provide a framework that would allow me to bring the world that I had created back to life. It's a fantasy world, largely based on Europe, specifically the Holy Roman Empire in particular, in and around I'd say the 14th century. It's just a bit before gunpowder, but we have all of the high fashion of the Renaissance. The Swordlands is just one area of the frontier between the lands of men who inhabit the fertile plains and the goblins in their mountain fortresses who raid out into the military zone that 100 years before had been a flourishing extension of humanity, newly settled, conquered by a class of knights who policed the region from their extensive castles, rather like the castles of the Holy Land, such as the Crac de Chevalier. Now, increasingly bold goblin forces had cleared this area of almost all human inhabitants, but the isolated garrison served as a bulwark, if you like, a demilitarised zone that was highly militarised, but it stopped the crumple zone, which stopped the hordes advancing further into the lands of men. These fortresses and their military orders need to be supplied, and the force that I've been building is a caravan escort force. The project has allowed me to combine a number of my favourite metal models with a whole raft of plastic figures in order to create something unique. I've used Wargames Foundry Landsknechts as the better mercenary troops, with some 3D printed doppelsoldners with their huge swords as the flamboyant Chevalier de Grayson as their literal cutting edge. To support them, I have a unit of Elvish Rangers and caravan guards who've been converted from a mix of plastics in my spare sprues box. I had a lot left over from my lockdown Renaissance build. So I've got a mix of Deus Vult miniatures from Fireforge, I've got the Oathmark figures from North Star, I've got Ancients from the Victrix range, I've got Warlord Landsknechts, and what's coming out of the sausage machine is a hugely colourful and varied force that nobody has seen before. I've just got a couple of 54mm Vikings from a company in the Ukraine who will serve as frost giants in their ranks. Now, on the other side, I wanted to re-examine some of the other races. You know, orcs get a bad rap in most fantasy worlds. And I tried to create something which people could have a degree of sympathy with. However, the goblins are not like that at all. They're utterly evil. What I wanted was to feel part of their force as men, as humans who'd been taken prisoner and now served the goblin lord, not as volunteers but enslaved legions, driven utterly mad by the experience. And this was another great opportunity to love some figures that I'd really enjoyed painting for Infamy, the Foundry Ancient Germans. Now, these are really superb sculpts, and the ones who are nearly or utterly naked look half crazy anyway. Well, I've got Paul at Sabotage to print me out a range of goblin weapons and shields, and I'm going to arm those figures with these, which will really give them a distinct fantasy look, and paint them up to look as crazy as possible. We're going to be seeing an awful lot of tattoos and body art, really very much like Sydney almost, to create a totally insane look. This project is completely off-piste for me, but it has been hugely interesting. I'll give you an example. I hit upon the idea of using the Foundry Germans in this crazy Janissary role last week at 3:00 in the morning when I was lying there thinking about what figures I could use. So if insomnia can be measured as a unit of enthusiasm, this chance to kit bash figures on both sides and create something utterly unique must surely be scoring highly. Now, a bit of a postscript. Everyone knew Mike Hobbs, whether it was through listening to his contributions on Meeples and Miniatures, where he was a regular, or meeting him around the shows or Firestorm games in Cardiff, where he used to like to go and game. Wherever you met him, however you knew him, whether it was directly or just through his presence on hobby social media, you would know that he was a very, very special bloke, a really good guy, and he is still much missed. For me, this project, not just Swordlands, but the whole of that fantasy world that I hope to flesh out with a variety of armies, by piggybacking it on the back of Midgard and creating that world for me to game in is a great way to remember a really, really good friend and preserve his memory for the future.